Now available in paperback and Kindle, All About Marilyn. Learn all about the struggles of a faded former teen sitcom star in this absolutely fabulous 5-star screenplay. Get All About Marilyn in paperback and Kindle on Amazon.com today. Showtime has decided not to move forward with trying to air a documentary on disgraced comedian Louis C.K. Now, back in 2017, Louis C.K. was dealing with allegations of sexual harassment from 5 women as related to several alleged events that spanned from the 90s to 2005. And in these incidents, each woman recounts similar situations where they were asked by comedian Louis C.K. to allegedly watch him masturbate while he was naked, or were in incidents where he was walking around them naked and allegedly masturbating in front of them. And these incidents were so disturbing that Caroline Subb decided to make a documentary on Louis C.K. and had managed to go out here and get a deal to get this documentary put on the air of Showtime, the network that aired the documentary made by Kamau Bell, talking about We Need to Talk About Bill Cosby. But Showtime has decided that they don't need to talk about comedian Louis C.K. or his alleged sexual misconduct as related to these 5 women. And I find it interesting that that Showtime, a division of Viacom, has decided to change its tune as related to Louis C.K., because it clearly shows that there is a double standard as related to these men, as related to these sexual harassment allegations and sexual misconduct allegations, because the network had no problem going out here airing a documentary about Bill Cosby. However, they give a whole new set of reasons, or as I believe to be excuses, as related to not wanting to air the documentary on Louis C.K. Now, according to David Nevins, the executive who was in charge, who greenlit the documentary last year in Scotland, in last summer, he decided that after he stepped down in October, that it's time to go out here and change his tune. Now, he says, I don't think that the social change that Me Too has brought about is resolved at all. There's a bit of backlash against Me Too, who has to go away and who has to come back. And in his words, Louis C.K. is a slightly different situation than Harvey Weinstein, and a great comedian who has to come back in his own way. Now, when I listen to that statement, it's just complete BS, because what Louis C.K. was doing was no different than Harvey Weinstein. And if you look at the so-called mission of Me Too, wasn't it supposed to be about stopping sexual harassment and stopping sexual assault? That was the original mission and intention of the mission of the Me Too movement. And if your David Nevins is saying, oh, the social change is Me Too brought about isn't resolved, then why is he going out here and giving a pass to Louis C.K.? That's a critical question I have to ask, because I believe the only reason why Louis C.K. is getting a pass is because the Viacom basically wants to continue making money off Louis C.K., and what they want to do is try to rehabilitate his image in an effort to try to repackage him eventually. But this basically shows the racism that's going on in blue leftist Hollywood, how they go out here and look to give a pass to a white male by squashing a documentary that paints a property in an unflattering light. A documentary that paints a white male in an unflattering light is canceled. However, documentaries, or as I call them, docugandas, which are nothing more than documentaries that are just propaganda to promote anti-black messages, such as Lifetime's Surviving R. Kelly and W. Kamau Bell's We Need to Talk About Bill Cosby. These documentaries are allowed to air, However, the documentary brought by a woman making claims about the sexual harassment that women suffered, this is not allowed to air on Viacom's Showtime. Again, this basically shows us a racial double standard, which is what the Me Too movement was basically founded on. The Me Too movement was basically founded on a campaign by women like Tarana Burke, Rose McGowan, and many others to go out here and try to destroy the professional reputations of black men. And they started that whole campaign with Bill Cosby. Now, they wanted to go out here and start taking down prominent black men with Bill Cosby and the campaign that was waged against him, starting with comedian Hannibal Buress making these allegations, and then all of these 60 plus women coming out here with all of these allegations and these questionable stories, because when you look at many of the stories in the context of history, many of these stories really don't add up. But many of the stories against Louis C.K. basically were adding up to the point where this documentary maker, Caroline Suh, basically felt so passionate that she felt like making a documentary on Louis C.K. And what's really interesting is that this documentary doesn't get to air, and the reason why it doesn't get to air, I believe, is because the color of the individual is one that they don't really want to push this whole narrative of sexual harassment and sexual assault on, because with the Me Too movement, everything started to backfire around about the time Roger Ailes decided that he was going to pay off Gretchen Carlson to prevent her from filing a sexual harassment lawsuit. And when Roger Ailes decided to give Gretchen Carlson that $20 million, that's when the hypergamy in many of these older women started to kick in, and many of those women started making allegations against white men in an effort to get a payday for themselves. And as those white women were looking to get multi-million-dollar paydays for themselves, they began looking to go out here and make allegations against white men. And as white men became the face of sexual predation, that's when things with the Me Too movement really started to backfire, and they started to really escalate when many of the women in the Me Too movement decided to go out here and start making allegations against politicians like Al Franken, and that's where the Me Too movement basically went way off the road, and that's when the white supremacists who were out here, who created the Me Too movement, needed to try to get the Me Too movement back on track. And that's what the David Nevins means by going out here and there's a backlash against Me Too, because Me Too basically bit the hand that fed it, and as it bit the hand that fed it, it was winding up making it where these white women were looking to try to grab economic and political power away from white men. And that's why they wanted to go out here and create this backlash against Me Too, because Me Too's original intention was to go out here and demonize black men as sexual predators by making allegations against black male celebrities, black male employees, and black male executives, and demonize them as the bad guy to take away their jobs, take away their professional reputations, and in the case of Bill Cosby, take away his freedom. That was the original intention of the Me Too movement before the movement basically moved too far and bit the hand that fed it. And now what they're trying to do with this whole Louis C.K. documentary is try to go out here and say, oh, there's a backlash against Me Too about who has to go away and who has to come back and who's allowed to come back. And what they want to do is go out here and allow many of the white men who had allegations made against them to be able to come back. And they want to use Louis C.K. as a gateway to allowing those white men to be able to come back, because what the Me Too movement's original mission, again, was all about destroying the lives of black men. But many white guys have wound up with their lives completely destroyed, and Louis C.K. was one of them, and now they're looking to try to protect Louis C.K., but that just shows us all the racial double standard as related to these docu-Ugandas and the intention and mission of these docu-Ugandas. Because these docu-Ugandas, like Surviving R. Kelly and we need to talk about Bill Cosby, they were designed to, again, promote anti-black racism. They were designed to present a message that the black man was the face of sexual predation. The black man was a violent black brute, and that even if he was a prominent and successful black man, he was one of these violent black brutes who just could not control himself in the presence of white women. That was the whole, or even black women in the case of R. Kelly. They wanted to show that the black man was just somebody who was just out of control as related to his lust, and they wanted to go out here and push these narratives. Unfortunately, because of Roger Ailes, the narrative basically wound up getting lost as women got caught up in their greed, and now what they want to do is try to pivot as related to white men, and that's what this whole cancellation of the Louis C.K. documentary is all about. Because this executive, David Nevins, is basically full of it when he says that Louis C.K. is a different situation than Harvey Weinstein, because what Louis C.K. was doing allegedly was no different than what Harvey Weinstein was doing, because again, he was out here allegedly taking off all of his clothes, presenting himself naked in front of these women, exposing himself, and then masturbating in front of them. And according to our courts, that constitutes as sexual assault in some cases. Now, in the business world, it would be considered sexual harassment as to the extreme, but in the court of law, it would be considered to be a sexual assault. And again, they want to do and say that Harvey Weinstein is different. No, Harvey Weinstein and Louis C.K. are the same thing. But what the white supremacists in the media want to do is try to spin a story to make you believe that one is no different. One is different than the other, when they're both perverts and sexual deviants, and both of them do not need to get a pass. If the Me Too movement was serious about stopping sexual harassment and stopping sexual assault, you would think they would have gone out here and said, okay, there's no difference between the two. But I find it quite interesting that we don't hear anything from Gloria Allred. We don't hear anything from a Rose McGowan. We don't hear anything from any of these white feminists. All of these white feminists are extremely silent, but they were loud out here about black men like Bill Cosby, who did nothing at all and was convicted on some trumped-up charges by an overzealous DA and wound up losing 3 years of his life. I mean, Bill Cosby basically suffered as a result of all of this Me Too movement. As a matter of fact, he was the first person they were weaponizing their allegations against. But in the article about this Louis C.K. documentary, we don't hear his name, and he was the one who they were trying to make the face of sexual predation, but we don't see his face or his name here. And the reason why is because Viacom basically wants to try to create a narrative around Louis C.K. in an effort to try to redeem his image. And the reason why they want to redeem his image is because they believe they can still make some money from him, even though they wound up losing a lot of money on a movie that they had planned called I Love You, Daddy, that they had greenlit, that was abruptly canceled hours before it was supposed to start filming. They see a way to try to continue making money off Louis C.K. And again, that just shows us how full of it Hollywood is. It just shows me that they are very arbitrary as related to their whole plans as related to so-called stopping sexual harassment and sexual assault, because they will allow a white male as related to these allegations to continue to find a way to get back to work, and they will make phrases saying, oh, about who's allowed to come back, because what they want to do is try to find a way to make Louis C.K. come back. And that really shows how hypocritical many in Hollywood are, how you will go along with an alleged sexual harasser and allow that white male to keep getting jobs and have a way to get back to getting jobs. But a black man like Bill Cosby, you want to demonize him as a monster and a brute. But Bill Cosby was exonerated as related to an appeal as related to that prosecution. And again, that case should have never been brought to trial, but an overzealous DA and a judge who was just out of bounds brought that case against Bill Cosby. But I find it interesting that in the case of black men, Showtime can go out here and air We Need to Talk About Bill Cosby. Lifetime can air Surviving R. Kelly, but Showtime won't air the documentary on Louis C.K., and they want to try to spin it like, oh, the executive who greenlit the project stepped down in a restructuring. And I believe that was done to be strategic, because what they want to do a lot of times in Hollywood is say, oh, that executive who was behind that project left that project, and now a new executive is coming in, when in actuality what they were doing was trying to find a way to strategically get rid of this project because they have future plans for a guy like Louis C.K., and what they want to do is try to find a way to get him back on the air. Again, this whole thing just shows us how full of it many who are part of supporting the Me Too movement were, and how it was basically a campaign waged on black men that got turned into a campaign against white men. And as it got turned into a campaign against white men, the white men decided to find a way to end this movement, and they ended the Me Too movement's overall mission once they started to see that Al Franken was forced to step down from his Senate seat. And once Al Franken was forced to step down from his Senate seat, that's when the politicians and the white feminists decided, hey, we need to back up off this Me Too movement. And ever since then, there's been a backlash against the Me Too movement and a campaign to try to redeem the image of dishonorable white men like Louis C.K. So when I see them canceling this documentary, I know that they didn't want to make a docuganda against a white man, because I find it interesting. They made movies about Harvey Weinstein, and those movies got no advertising and no traction. They made documentaries about Harvey Weinstein, and they got no traction. And again, this was deliberate because they want black men to be the face of sexual predation. They want the black man's face to be associated with sexual violence, and that was one of the things that led to the complete backfiring on the Me Too movement. They want the white men were becoming that face, which was the truth, and now what they want to do is try to spin narratives to bury the white male as the face of sexual predation narrative, and canceling this documentary is all part of that campaign to make all of these allegations go away, because they realize that the whole campaign has completely failed, and with the campaign completely failing, they are trying to regroup, because again, I find it interesting they never said anything about Bill Cosby in this article. Meanwhile, in every other publication, they're constantly talking about him. And again, this is deliberate by design, because they want Louis C.K. to be able to make movies with him and make TV shows with him. And with him being gone for 5 years, they want to repackage Louis C.K. And part of repackaging Louis C.K. is making sure that this documentary by Caroline Suh winds up being buried and never ever seeing light. So she's probably been paid off for this documentary, and she's got her money. They've got the documentary, or the anti-white male docuganda, in the vault, and we'll probably never see this documentary ever again, because what we're seeing here is Hollywood again being the media arm of white supremacy, making sure that we see the stories that they want us to see. And that's what we're seeing with them deciding not to move forward with this Caroline Suh documentary, which has now been bought and put in the vault to never, ever be seen again. Now, if you want to learn more about how the Me Too movement is an anti-black movement and how it really destroyed relations between men and women, you can pick up my book, The Woman Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Woman Crisis at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. And if you want to see me make more videos about the entertainment industry, you can send a donation to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.